He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday and Friday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content such as interviews and D&D campaigns at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues, Campfire Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're going to look back towards the collection of CIA UFO documents that were released under the Freedom of Information Act. However, before we get into that, a couple of plugs. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Additionally, we're also on Patreon, where you can get those ad-free early episodes available there. And should you want to reach out to us directly, send us an email via cryptidclues@gmail.com. But without further ado, let's get into this. So a good chunk of episodes back, I referenced and dived into a few of these files that were on the website here. But just a quick rehash for those newcomers. The website is called The Black Vault. Basically, it has a amazing collection and variety of different documents everywhere. But in this case, this collection of reports, all formerly paper documents and CD-ROMs, converted now into PDFs. This website's owner is John Greenwald Jr., and he spent many, many years petitioning for the documents to be released, and is the one responsible for the document uploading as well. I can only imagine the actual painstaking amount of hours you'd have to spend just scanning every single document individually. And so I don't think he touched up any of the documents. A lot of them are in pretty dang good condition, so I definitely appreciate that, because some of them, they're very hard to read. They got the black out ink on them and everything. I highly recommend go to the website, The Black Vault, and look into the UFO documents that are listed onto the website. So on top of all this, when you add the American COVID-19 relief bill, which strangely enough included a provision that called for UFO-related documents to be disclosed within that 180 days of the bill's ratification, these past years have really just been opening up on our government's history with these unknown objects. And when I say governments, our governments, I mean that in the sense of the notion, okay, not just the Canadian, but the American, the Russian, and all over the world, our governments of the world. I digress. So my goal today is to recount some of these digitalized documents for your informative benefit. Also be warned, some of these documents, like I said, are extremely difficult to read and have blackouts on them. While I've definitely rehearsed and read through these multiple times, we should be able to get through this together. So our first document is from the USSR, distributed on April 10th, 1972. Specifics are, of course, all blacked out, but this body of text remains. Another Soviet, who was a member of a committee the USSR has established to investigate unusual phenomena, in other words, flying saucers, gave a serious talk which was actually very humorous. His approach was, well, of course, we know there isn't anything to this alleged phenomenon, flying saucers, but on the other hand, blank, during this talk, blank and other Soviets joked and laughed and obviously did not take the speaker's remarks seriously. Blank remarked later to blank that the Flying Saucer Committee consists of many politicians, theorists, historians, and similar type people. It has little, if any, scientific talent. End quote. Now, I like this because of the lack of interest it has by individuals outside the established group. I'm going to go for a deeper pull here, but there is a scene in Transformers: Dark Side of the Moon. I know, forgive me, but hear me out. In this film, it's where the government's head honcho doesn't understand why the Decepticons can open up their portal to their homeworld via space bridge since the government has the pillars. Sam Witwicky tries to tell her that no, you only have a couple. The Decepticons have thousands. But she's like, no, we have the control pillar. And it's this mindset that I want to focus on specifically, where you think you have everything, all the cards, but you refuse to properly listen and adhere to the minds of the experts on these things that are so much more well-informed than these political figures. Like in the document I just quoted, they remarked how the Flying Saucer Committee consisted of people that had really no scientific talent, like politicians. Why the heck are politicians involved in this? To me, it just leaves me flabbergasted as to why that notion is validated. It just doesn't make sense. But anyways, I digress. Let's keep it up with another document. This one is along the Iran-USSR border, titled as Sighting of Unusual Phenomenon on June 17th, 1966. And I quote, "On an international flight, I observed a strange phenomenon on the horizon. As we were approaching the Rudisher beacon, located approximately 25 miles from the Mehrabad airport, Tehran, we suddenly observed a brilliant white sphere, appropriating the coloration and intensity of a full bright moon. The sphere appeared suddenly and, at the first sighting, was approximately 3 times the size of a full moon. At the moment, we were flying at approximately 18,000 feet on a course of 070 degrees at a speed of about 200 knots. The sighting occurred just as we prepared to fly a circular pattern over the Rudisher beacon prior to descending to a lower altitude and heading for Mehrabad Airport. We observed the sighting throughout the time we circled the Rudisher beacon, a time we later calculated to be of 4 to 5 minutes duration. I would estimate the position of the sphere to be on a heading of 010 degrees and deep within the Soviet Union, perhaps north of 60 degrees altitude. During the 4 to 5 minutes that I observed the sphere, it continued to grow in size as its intensity diminished. Toward the end of this period, it became very faint and its enormous size seemed to fill the sky. The base of the sphere appeared to rest on the horizon throughout this period it was observed, indicating that the center of the sphere was rising during the time as it was expanding. The weather conditions were excellent, and the unusually clear sky offered unlimited visibility. Another airliner at a slightly lower altitude also observed the phenomenon, and we exchanged remarks about it. On landing at Mehrabad Airport some 20 minutes later, we discovered that the phenomenon was not seen from the ground, except possibly during the very last stages. At that point, since the intensity had so markedly diminished, it would go unnoticed unless one were alerted to look for it. The reason for its being obscured from the ground is attributed to the abrupt rise of the very high mountain range north of the city in the direction of the phenomenon. I don't know what caused this strange occurrence, which we observed. I had never seen anything resembling it in over 20 years of flying experience. One theory advanced to me was that the sphere was a false moon, and that such a phenomenon was seen near Rome, Italy. My feeling is that the sphere was forced by gases, emanating perhaps from a man-made explosion. These gases forcing the sphere may have been illuminated by the sun from the backside. If this was the case, it would account for the diminishing intensity as the density of the gases decreased with the explosion of the sphere." End quote. Now, I really like this account, because not only do we see this giant ball of light, which in its own right is another rabbit hole, we have another plane that confirmed the sighting as well. I'm very big on this. When you are out in the bush, you see a Sasquatch, you see a Dogman, anything that is just abnormal, and you have that reaffirmation of someone else who also witnesses it with you. It's just a great reassuring component to have, like this pilot. Now, it's also important to note the mindset. Well, I assure you, I'm not an expert or a pilot. My knowledge on gases as well is very limited. This person has a much more credible position and perspective than I do myself. I'm not an expert. But it can still be said that the rationalization of this situation is mind-boggling. So let's say this was just gas related. The person has great deduction skills and figured it out. But if it's not, this is how our mind defaults from things we don't understand into logic and reason, where we turn the simple explanation that in most cases doesn't exist. The sphere, or false moon as it was also called, could be one of the most realistic alien things to ever be witnessed by humankind. But our societies have shaped our thought to not wonder, but to dismiss. So with that, I'm going to jump to a quick ad break and we'll be right back. And we're back. So let's see what else is lurking in these documents. Okay, this is a bit of a short one. And I quote, "Prepared and disseminated by the Central Intelligence Agency. Report of unusual flying object sightings and attendant scientific activity. In November 1955, I received a letter from my niece. This letter contained the following interesting item. The so-called flying saucers for several weeks kept the people in a nervous state. These very fast, speeding flyers kept scientific groups very busy. I'm aware you had already heard from the papers. 12,000 kilometers per hour was estimated on these flyers. Included with the letter was the following sketch indicating the formation and suspected course of the above objects." End quote. So, the sketch isn't anything major, but another piece of the puzzle offering a trajectory between Moscow and Budapest. This is kind of showing like the line between the two and then the ships and their kind of orientation. And the saucers appear to fly in these formations of 4s and 3s. However, unfortunately, like obvious reasons, much more detail has been blacked out regarding this case. The classic black Sharpie, again, mark, scribbled onto the paper. It's not only a thing limited to the movies. This is a very, very real thing. I swear, when I use Sharpie in documents today, you can still see through the Sharpie. So this CIA Sharpie is definitely some top tier technology from space that we don't know about. But I digress. Now this next one, this is cool. This somewhat dives into the USO kind of territory. So it's unidentified submergible objects. Now, this document is dated February 24th, 1992. And I quote, "Swedish report on Soviet submarine violations." And it's reported as bullet points, so to speak. Number 1, uninvited guests in the Swedish fjords. Number 2, foreign submarines continued to penetrate Sweden's territorial waters in 1991. But evidently, these intrusions ceased in September. That conclusion is contained in a report which Swedish Armed Forces Commander-in-Chief General Bengt Gustafsson submitted to the country's government. Number 3, the Command-in-Chief compiles annual reports about violations of Sweden's airspace and territorial waters, and their appearance is regarded with restraint here, but this time, the Swedes impatiently awaited Bengt Gustafsson's reports on the causes for them. Not long ago, Commander Carl Anderson, famous for his active participation in the declaration that all the commotion about submarine incursions is simply a chimera, like the story of flying saucers. Number 4, how did the general confirm his story? He confirms that the country's Coast Guard recorded approximately 5 probable violations off Sweden's east coast to the north and south of Stockholm. In his words, there was an additional pair of incursions, but with a lesser degree of probability. Number 5. As we can see, this is a question of probable incursions, but nevertheless, the Commander-in-Chief says he was 100% convinced that foreign submarines have entered the country's territorial waters. Number 6. The report notes that Swedish seamen twice managed to record submarine noises, which, according to military experts, were identical to those recorded for the first time during the violation of Sweden's sea boundaries on the west coast in 1984, and then caught 40 more times. Number 7. By the nature of the noises, the Swedes sort of established that they're dealing with a mini submarine 23 to 25 meters long. Number 8. However, the primary evidence that incursions are taking place in principle, in the words of Ministry of Defense representatives, is contained in the video film Uninvited Guests, which is attached to the report. Specifically, this film contains frames that were taken at the bottom of one of the bays of Sweden's Gotland Island, in which damage to the underwater anti-submarine warning cable is visible. The film states that an underwater all-terrain vehicle deployed from abroad, a submarine, might have damaged the signal system. Number 9. And still, even this did not appear to be adequately convincing to many Swedes. A number of experts expressed the opinion that ship's anchors or bottom trawl nets could have damaged the cable. Number 10. However, there is a detail in the Commander-in-Chief's report that calls special attention to itself. Violations of Swedish waters ceased in September 1991. And although Ben Gustafsson says that it is still early to come to a conclusion on the subject of the cessation of the incursions, there is still something to ponder here. Number 11. First of all, this question arrives. Isn't the disappearances of periscopes from Swedish waters not associated with the replacement of the former USSR Ministry of Defense leadership after the August push? Referencing, of course, the 1991 attempts, the government takeover that failed by Soviet Union Communist Party members. If it is associated, doesn't it signify that our submarines were nevertheless violating Swedish territorial waters? The sooner the answer is given on that score, the better. Number 12. However, that does not completely rule out that this is only a temporary break in the periscope hunt. In Sweden, and that entirely different forces are related to the incursions. In this regard, attention is directed to a recent article by investigator Tommy Lindfors in the Stockholm newspaper Dagens Nyheter, I hope I said that right, which told a story that was unknown to the Swedish public. In February 1984, a foreign submarine which appeared to be American was detected in the coastal waters of southern Sweden, near Karlskrona Naval Base. Number 13. Having fired 22 depth charges at the submarine, the Coast Guard attempted to detain it, but it did not manage to catch or destroy it. Why? Maybe because on that very same day, the American ABC television reported that U.S. Navy mini-submarines are visiting the waters of friendly states for the purpose of studying underwater objects. It is easy too, under that the Swedes were given the signal not to bomb too zealously. At that time, Izvestia wrote about CBS's acknowledgement. Number 14. In December of 1991, General Gustafsson ordered the Coast Guard to act more energetically in the event of territorial water violations, specifically to immediately open fire if sonar detects the presence of unidentified mini-submarines about 30 meters long. Now, we assume the measures will be even more severe. While commenting on the Commander-in-Chief's report, we will never reconcile ourselves to the fact that some state is violating Swedish waters, neither now nor in the future. That is the whole prompt here of the 15 different line items in this entire CIA report. Now, hot dang, what a report that was. And it can get a little convoluted. And when I've definitely, in retrospect, like kind of gone through it again and again, trying to formulate my own perspective on it, the takeaway that I acquired was yes, in 1991, the government takeover attempt occurred in Russia, and that could have resulted in halted submarine incursions in the Swedish waters. But having the United States confess to many submarines at exploring underwater objects, what if by chance some USO activity was occurring and Russia really had nothing to do with it? You could also say it's a double standard here where Russia wanted everything to do with it and was, again, going in here and trying to get involved with it. And the USOs were not the thing that were being detected by Sweden, but the other states' incursions were being detected by Sweden. Now, there wasn't any direct conflict or cause of concern that I could find directed at Sweden, like, hey, we're going to war or anything like that. This is the 80s and the 90s here. So what was this drawing point to Sweden waters for not just Russia, but also the States? What if the United States was trying to just act fast enough to get in there and see what's going on? Clearly, there is an underwater focal point that was off the coast of Sweden. But whatever that point of focus is beyond me. I'm sure that at our point in time now, governments have gone into much more of a diplomatic approach and have looked at properly and collaboratively handling these sorts of situations in a very, very low-key type of way that will not alarm the overall public. And depending on how you stand with the way the world is now with war and such, it depends if that kind of collaboration is still respected, upheld between Russia and other countries around the world when it comes to the topic of USOs, UFOs, aliens in general, cryptids, really. I mean, the list goes on, but that would be a rabbit hole for another conversation another day. And on that note, I think that's all the time we have for today's episode. But thank you for tuning in to another session of Cryptid Clues, Campfire Clues. And remember, you can find these reports. I have the link actually included in the description down below. The Black Vault, they have an awesome amount of information that has just been uploaded and published into the Freedom Information Act. But if you want to reach out to us, you can via our email, CryptidClues@gmail.com. To find more of our content, you can do so at CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, and also our Patreon, where you get ad-free early episodes available there. So until next time, everyone, take care and stay safe.
Thank you.